Hello, this is the RPG Pundit, the final boss at Internet Shitlords. This is Meatball. Hello, Meatball. And today, I wanted to talk to you about a funny little incident that happened relating to Strixhaven, and to talk a little bit about Strixhaven itself and why it pretty much sucks. I don't know how many of you have heard about this, but it came out in the news that Wizards of the Coast was forced to apologize to a certain person who, her name was Tanya DePass, who was apparently the cultural consultant on Strixhaven and was not credited for her important work. And so they apologized to her, I don't know what else, and it became significant news. And the first thing that led me to question is, wait a minute, what culture are you even talking about, right? Because, this is Strixhaven. It's a setting, and for those of you who don't know, Strixhaven is the newest D&D book, and it's basically a magic school, like Harry Potter style, except theoretically it's a college, except it has a prom. And a largely gay prom based on the image involved there. I don't know what's going on there, because prom is high school, not college. But maybe the people who wrote it never went to either. I don't know. But it's basically meant to be a place where you're playing a campaign that gets you from level 1 to level 10 without actually doing any normal D&D stuff. Instead, it's all about your multiple relationships with a mechanical system, by the way, that encourages you to cheat on your partners, right? To have multiple partners. So it's literally saying, in college you should screw everyone you can and basically not keep your word to anyone. And then stuff like your life being a hot mess, and then there's the prom. And apparently there's, other school activities and courses. And then there's a story. There's a kind of adventure, but it's basically a ripoff from what I've been told. It's basically a ripoff of Harry Potter. So there you are. That's Strixhaven, the newest source book, magical school source book for, they call it a source book. It's actually an adventure book. It's a set of a number of adventures, 4 adventures, I think it is, that are supposed to cover the 4-year term of your education there. It lacks a lot of the source book details that you would get from a proper source book. And it basically sucks. Like everything Wizards is producing now, because Wizards has already gone woke and are slowly beginning the process of going broke. I want to note something while we're talking about magical schools. The Invisible College is not an RPG about a magical school. It is not a Harry Potter style scenario. The Invisible College is a conspiracy RPG about secret societies. Right? It's called the Invisible College because the secret society that the player characters are in by default in the default game is it was a historically real movement, universalist movement, that was composed largely of people that were into the study of the Hermetic arts and things like that, but also a lot of great artists and scientists and founders of the Royal Society and that sort of thing. And so that's not a college in the sense of what we think of as college today. Right? It just means an association, I guess you could say. Right. So don't get confused. I've had some people that are confused. They're like, well, hang on. Is this Harry Potter stuff? No, it's not Harry Potter stuff. It's Illuminati stuff, sort of. So, you're basically playing magical Freemasons. So anyway, back to our main point here. The Strixhaven book is not based on any culture. It's not like a magical college from an African style setting or an Indian style setting or a Middle Eastern style setting or anything like that, right? It's just generic fantasy dreck. And so my first thought when I heard about how Tanya DePass, cultural consultant, was not even given credit for her important work doing cultural consultancy on a game with no culture, was what was the point of all this, right? Tanya DePass herself, I did a little bit of looking up, is somebody who is listed as, her job is listed as activist on Google, and she's born in the United States. She's African American, but from the U.S. And I haven't done a deep dive into her. I don't know. Maybe she did degrees in history and cultural studies and things like that. But otherwise, it sounds like she has expertise she doesn't have any expertise to be a cultural consultant on anything except maybe, I guess, by SJW standards, I guess you could say the African American experience or something like that, right? But like, if she took like Mongol throat singer studies in whatever college she went to, that by SJW standards, she still would have no qualification to be a cultural consultant on, traditional Mongol culture, because she herself is not part Mongol, right? So it wouldn't matter, right? This is the great weirdness of what SJWs use cultural consultants for. They are meant to be basically tokens. The only reason you hire one is for whatever the SJW victimhood designation traits are that they have, that they bring with them, right? So their skin color or race, their gender or their gender identity or their sexual orientation. Because the question of expertise doesn't matter. Nobody is going to be hired because of their doctorate in a subject, right? They're going to be hired because they fit the demographic demands that cultural consultancy requires wizards so that they won't be attacked by a group of ideological terrorists, right? That makes it very interesting, because maybe in theory someone like Tanya DePass might be able to be used as an expert on an African setting, even if she's never been to Africa, just by virtue of the color of her skin, because the SJWs, being such scientific people, believe that your skin color and blood gives you magic powers of intuitively and inherently knowing cultures you've had no actual intellectual contact with whatsoever, right? Regardless of anything to do with your level of education or where you've been or where you've traveled, right? Their theory is that, somebody who was born in California with black skin, but who never even graduated high school, is a greater expert on, say, Zulu studies than somebody who is white, born and raised in South Africa, and did a 14-year doctorate on Zulu studies, right? The black guy from Compton knows more, even if he's not even descended from Zulus, which he almost certainly wouldn't be if he's a black guy in Compton. It doesn't matter. All that matters is the skin tone, right? Now, maybe I've been thinking about this a little bit, right? Like, maybe within the skin tone, is there a difference? Like, would SJWs suggest, if you've got like a Chinese person who was born in Canada, was institutionalized at the age of 4, and has never been outside a Canadian mental hospital in his adult life, would that person be as great a cultural expert of, say, medieval Song Dynasty China as a professor at Beijing University, born and bred Han Chinese, spent his life in China and has spent his entire academic career studying Song Dynasty China? Would they look at those two guys and say, well, obviously the Beijing University professor knows more than the guy that's been in the hospital for the criminally insane since the age of 4, right? Who's a Canadian that doesn't speak any Chinese and just happens to have a skin color, right? You would think that they would. But here's the problem, right? Is that if you do, then you're immediately saying that it's not the magic power of your race or your gender or your sexual identity that gives you some kind of inherent magical way of knowing everything to be able to be a qualified cultural consultant. It means that knowing something actually matters. And then you run into a very big problem, because what happens if you've got somebody who is white and who is has a more illustrious career and has spent more time studying Song Dynasty China, maybe also spent most of his adult life in China, speaks perfectly fluent Chinese, right? Has more books to his name published there, won some medal from the Chinese Communist government for his work and research in Chinese Song Dynasty history. if you're arguing that the Chinese professor is better than the mental case living outside Toronto and who's never been to China and speaks no Chinese by something other than the color of his skin, that is, say, by his training, then suddenly training does matter, and you can't have both, right? Either the only thing that matters is skin color, or skin color doesn't matter, right? It's one of the two. It can't be anything else. Lived experience and education matter, but skin color doesn't. But anyways, I'm going off on a complete tangent here, but I thought I'd leave you guys with that brain twister. Not that it really matters, because obviously SJWs are a fanatical religious cult, and they don't actually care about reality, reason, logic, or truth, right? None of those things matter to them. That's their way out. The only thing that matters to them is inventing a narrative in their heads and then trying to violently impose that narrative on all of humanity at whatever the cost of money or lives, right? In any case, I eventually realized that, in fact, there is a culture to Strixhaven. There is something that this person might be an actual expert on, in fact, that would qualify her to count as the cultural consultant of the Strixhaven book. And that's that Strixhaven, it's not based on any historical culture or any, on neither any European culture, nor African, nor Asian, nor Indian subcontinent, nor Middle Eastern culture. It's pretty much, I think it's pretty much based on, say, Evergreen University, right? The college, the radical left-wing college that is found, somewhere near Seattle, where Dungeons and Dragons is made, right? It's based, the culture of Strixhaven is 21st century Chaz Seattle culture. That's the culture that it's in, right? You're playing, it's supposedly in a fantasy world, but you're actually just playing a bunch of weirdos in cosplay in Seattle, right? That are all graduates of Evergreen University, the one that, the one that a few years ago was trying to murder university professors for not thinking the way they wanted them to think, right? They actually had an angry mob come after a science professor for daring to suggest that science is a real thing, So yeah, I don't know. I in her Wikipedia biography, and again, I don't want to go even more profoundly into this thing. It doesn't mention, I think, where or if Tanya DePass went to university, but I'm guessing that her university experience would have been, in fact, very much, being a left-wing, a left-wing modern 21st century or 20th. I don't know how old she is, 20th or 21st, late 20th or early 21st century university, would have been very similar to what they're actually trying to do in Strixhaven as a culture. So maybe she is an expert after all, right? Like, she's an expert in the only culture that D&D ever wants to allow you to play again, right? Like, all their games are meant to be that culture from now on, the ones that they want you to play. Because don't get me wrong, there might still be some books in the future. There'll be like a 250-page book with, 55-page adventures, of which some of those, quite a few of them probably will be made for pennies a word, for nothing, by wage slave writers of certain ethnic or sexual identities, that they'll write these up and they'll be supposedly expert works because of the culture that person belongs to. Like Daniel Kwan, the Canadian guy who claimed that Oriental Adventures was somehow evil Orientalism, and that it was offensive to Chinese people. Then, given the chance at Candlekeep Mysteries to do his own adventure that should have been based on like Chinese culture, he wrote something that any person of any color who'd spent a few years watching wuxia movies could have written, right? Like, he did nothing at all that produced anything original, but he was the right skin color, right? And he had the right friends, he had the right connections, he was part of the SJW crowd. He had attacked Dungeons & Dragons as being awful, so obviously he's the right person to write a Dungeons & Dragons adventure, right? There are going to be more things like that, where there'll be like these 5-page adventures in big anthologies or something, but those aren't meant for you to play them. They're not meant really for anybody to play them. They're meant to be there to pay the Danegeld to the SJW demands. They're meant to be there for people to virtue signal about them being there, for wizards to virtue signal it, for SJWs to virtue signal it about how they've basically made them be there, and then for other people, other gamers or quasi-gamers or terrified gamers to virtue signal about how awesome it is that it's there. But you shouldn't actually play it, right? I mean, I think it's very clear at this point that you should never ever play a character that doesn't fit your own identity. Because, I mean, let's put it this way, if only a Chinese person can write a Chinese RPG adventure, then obviously you can't play that adventure if you're a white person as a Chinese character, because you don't know, if you don't know enough, if somebody who's like studied Chinese history and culture at an academic level but isn't the right skin color, wouldn't be qualified to be an expert on Chinese culture in their book, if they wouldn't be an expert, then obviously you as a player who's never, most of you, I assume, have never even been to China, probably haven't studied a lot about, medieval Chinese culture or something like that. So obviously you guys wouldn't be capable of playing a Chinese person, right? And anything you did would automatically be offensive, right? It would automatically be racist of you to do it. So you are allowed in D&D from now on to play only humans of your own race, gender, and sexual identity, or to play weirdo non-human creatures, right? Like you can play these owl people in Strixhaven, or you can play some blue-eyed quarter elemental with magic powers or something like that. You can, and basically what you're doing is cosplaying, right? At least until they tell you that's bigoted too, because, I mean, like, for example, can a white person still play an orc? Because SJWs are convinced that orcs are black people, right? Like, their whole argument for changing orcs in D&D is that black people are orcs, which is an incredibly racist argument. I do not believe it. I denounce that position. Black people are not orcs. Black people are human beings. Orcs are monsters. They're evil monsters. So if you think an orc is a black person, you are racist, sir. But they believe it. So, like, in their point of view, now that they've, like, reformed orcs into, like, these wonderful, kind-hearted beings, are white people allowed to play orcs? Because if they think orcs are meant to be black people, does that mean only black people can play orcs? It's really a question. Somebody needs to start asking this sort of stuff to Jeremy Crawford, like what's allowed, right? Because there's very clearly things that are not allowed now, and very clearly things that they have to do, like hire diversity consultants for games that have no, or cultural consultants for games that have no culture, right? Like this Tanya DePass person. That it's something that she, what did she have to do? She just had to be there. That's all that had to happen. The only thing they should have done is put her on the credits, because she didn't have to do any work. None of that matters. All that matters is that they did it, so they can virtue signal about it, right? So she's there, again, only because of her particular qualities, which would be, her progressive stack qualities, the people she's connected to, and and that she's got the right ideology, right? And we know all that's true, right? She's done other things where she's been super critical of, nerd culture for being evil and racist and bigoted and what have you. So they know that that's the right person to work on D&D. People who hate D&D are the right people to work on D&D, right? So this is where they're at with Strixhaven. And what I am going to tell you is, if you want to play in a magical school, but you don't want to buy a game that's written by idiots and by people who hate you and by people who are basically paying money to what is like a cross between these type of diversity consultants or cultural consultants or sensitivity readers. What they are basically is like 50% Soviet political commissar, right? Like that they're there to make sure that nothing goes against the ideological demands of the totalitarian dictatorship, and if it does, they're gonna, you're gonna be reported and executed, and they're breeding terror for its own sake. But the other 50%, because they're being paid for this, is that they're like mafia protection racket enforcers, right? Like they're like the captains that go around for Tony Soprano, getting the bribe from every business, right? That if you don't pay that, then they're going to come and burn your business down, right? And that's what it amounts to. That's what her entire job is. She's made a career that requires no talent or ability whatsoever, just the threat of what they will do to you if you don't obey and if you don't pay up. You know. Now, if you want to play a game that is set in a magical school that is not made by SJWs, by people that hate you, in order to make a mockery of your game, I will recommend one of my products, but it's not the Invisible College, though you should buy the Invisible College for a badass, modern occult conspiracy RPG that's got like secret societies and intelligence agencies in the world fighting a secret war for control over humanity's future, with a magic system that's based on actual modern occult principles. It's really great. But the one I'm going to recommend to you if you want a magical school campaign is actually RPG Pundit Presents number 54, Medieval College Adventures. And it is set, it's a 23-page book, so it's not a small RPG Pundit Presents book. It is set in the universities of Oxford and Cambridge in the Middle Ages, in, of course, the Lion and Dragon default of, the magic as medieval people understood it is real, and legends are real, what have you. And the book has an outline of kind of the history of these schools. And the thing is, medieval universities is like, imagine everything in Animal House and a little bit of Lord of the Flies, and that's what medieval universities are like. And the adventures that are in there and the stuff that's in there, like the rules for the students, it tells you everything, like the details of the daily life of a student, the rules of a student, who became students, students at Oxford or Cambridge in the 15th century usually started at 12 or 13 years old when they started to do their bachelor's, and it took them 6 years to become magisters, right? And it tells you all of the individual halls or colleges, each of which have their own particular quirks and special qualities. It tells you about the conflicted history that these colleges have that these halls and colleges within the universities have with each other, and also their struggles with the town people. And basically, medieval college students were people who had a little bit, they're very weird people in the Middle Ages, because they had a little bit of money that was usually given to them by their parents, but they had like almost no supervision, right? Like they were free. And remember, most of them were between like 12 and 18 years old, right? These were boys, basically, that were allowed to run rampant, right? And now the authorities of the university tried to clamp down on them. But we know that there's stuff that is like, very clearly they were up to some crazy shit because of the things that we know that they were, that were put into the rules, right? Or accounts of punishments or things that happened, like people riding into their lecture hall on horseback, right? And stuff like that. And there's a whole bunch of adventure, like encounters and adventure seeds in the whole product, including an encounter table about the sort of things that happen there, right? So like, it was very common stuff in these colleges on any given year on campus for there to be, students fighting duels over their favorite prostitute, school pranks where they like steal a Stonehenge type menhir and put it in some weird place, and weird stuff can happen then. Somebody committing some kind of blasphemy or sacrilege in the chapel, all kinds of stuff like that, right? Obviously, people bringing prostitutes into the dorm and while pretending that it's their visiting sister or cousin, because you weren't allowed to have women in the dorms. Unless they were blood relatives of yours, right? Feuds between different halls in the school that have, sometimes centuries of history. Foreign students that are secretly spies for an enemy crown. Football hooliganism. And, weird theft or black market trade in forbidden books. And the big once a generation event that seemed to happen through most of the Middle Ages, which is the angry townies of Oxford or Cambridge rise up in hundreds and try to burn the entire college down, right? So this is good stuff for a campaign, for an interesting, medieval, authentic, and entertaining campaign. So be sure to check that out if you want a better alternative to Strixhaven.
Medieval College Adventures, RPG Pundit Presents number 54. It's on PDF at Drive-Thru. The link will probably be in the description below if I remember to put it in. That's something that's actually got a real culture. And it's a culture that I know about, not because of the color of my skin, but because I studied like hell to learn about it, right? And I've been to the places where there was things, related to it. So that's what actually qualifies someone to be an expert or a consultant on something. Just like, I was an expert on game design and therefore consulted on game design. But it's not about, your demographic. Anyways, I guess that's it for today. I hope everybody has a great holiday. I'm not sure whether I'll do another video. I'm pretty sure I won't do a video before Christmas anyways. I'll do another video before New Year's. It might even show up on a YouTube channel. I'll let you guys know if that pans out. But for the moment, please like this video, subscribe if you haven't subscribed yet, share the video everywhere that you think people will find it interesting or get pissed off about it. And if you want to support me, pick up my products like the RPG Pundit Presents series, like number 54, Medieval College Adventures, or my books like Lion and Dragon, World of the Last Sun, The Invisible College, Star Adventurer, Cults of Chaos, all sorts of great books that you can get that are made by someone who loves gaming and doesn't despise you and wants you to have fun gaming, and the books are made for you to use. They're not made to virtue signal anything. They're made for you to use them and game with them. So that you'd think that would be just like, okay, that's normal, right? But it's not anymore. So when you find people that do that, support them, right? Support me and support other people in the OSR who are still doing that. That's everything for today. Currently smoking Lorenzetti Poker plus Argento Natural.